There was once a baker who lived with his daughter. Well, his daughter was selfish and mean, as the baker was kind and generous. And one night, the baker locked his baker's shop and set off for home with his daughter following him. But as he walked away, there appeared, shuffling from a dark doorway, an old crone, and she was bent over, and she was in rags, and she was poor. And she stepped up to them and she said, "Give me some bread." "It is too late, old woman," said the selfish daughter. "Go away." But the baker said, "Daughter, Charity, you open the shop. There will be a little dough left. Bake her some bread while I go and warm our house." So the daughter reluctantly went inside the baker's shop. She opened the door and the old woman shuffled in behind her. And she took a roll of dough. And she put that dough in the oven, which was still hot, and closed the oven door. And soon the shop was full of the smell of baking bread. Do you know that smell? Do you enjoy that smell? "So quick the bread baked," said the baker's daughter, and she opened the oven door, and there inside was a fine crusty loaf already, and it was much greater than the little dough that she had put inside. And she took that crusty loaf out, and there was that old woman, and she looked and said, "This crusty loaf is too good for her," and she set it aside for the next morning. "Away with you, old woman, out of the shop." The old woman came closer to the baker's daughter, and a bony finger appeared from under her rags, and she said, baker girl, bake me some bread." Would you say that with me? Baker girl, bake me some bread. Bake me some bread, for soon I'll be dead. And the baker's daughter turned once more and saw that there was still a little dough that was left. And she took a small roll of dough and she popped it in the oven. And once more, even though that roll of dough was smaller than the one before, that shop was full of the smell of baking bread. Even better than before, there was the spicy smell of cinnamon. And the girl opened the oven to find that the oven was full. A great cinnamon loaf stood there. And she took that loaf out of the oven and she was amazed. "Too good for that old woman," said the baker's daughter, and she set it aside. But the old woman shuffled closer. And with her bony finger, she poked the baker girl in the ribs. And you know what she said? She said, "Baker girl, bake me some bread. Bake me some bread, for soon I'll be dead." The baker's girl remembered her father and what he had said, and she turned and there was just a tiny roll of dough, hardly that size. And she opened the oven door and popped it inside and closed the oven door, and immediately the room was full of the smell of baking bread, but not just baking bread, but cinnamon and fruit. And what else do you think she could smell baking inside that bread? Oh, do you have any notion?
No.
Perhaps one of the bigger people has an idea. What could you smell baking in that bread? Imagine that lovely smell.
Honey.
There was honey in that bread. There was candied orange peel in that bread. It was the most delicious smelling bread that you could possibly imagine. And the baker's daughter, she opened the oven, and this loaf filled the oven. It was bursting out of the oven, and she lifted it and could not believe her eyes. Too good for the old woman. and she set it aside, and she said, "Out with you, old woman, away!" But now the old woman turned and stood, and as she stood, the rags fell from her shoulders, and there before the baker's daughter stood a spirit, shining wings. The baker's daughter looked, and she said, "Who? Who? And she could say nothing more. And as she stood there, the baker's daughter's arms became covered in strange feathers, and her feet became claws, and her nose became a beak, and her eyes became round as saucers. And the baker's daughter opened her wings, for she had turned into an owl. And she took off, and out of the baker's shop door she flew, and into the starry dark night. And that winged spirit vanished herself into the night air. You know, the owl was a baker's daughter. We know what we are, but we know not what we may become.